The first man on trial in the murder case of Crystal Rogers was found guilty today, nearly 10 years after the Bardstown mother disappeared. Thanks for being here tonight at 10. I'm Gilbert Coursey. WDRB's Fallon Glick breaks down the final day in court for Steve Lawson and how long he could spend in prison.
10 years of waiting, 4 days in court, hoping for one 6-letter word: guilty. The family of Crystal Rogers saying their prayers have been answered. Steve Lawson, the first suspect on trial for the murder of Crystal Rogers, was found guilty of tampering with evidence and guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Lawson admitted he only moved the seat in Rogers' car on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway after getting a call from his son Joseph Lawson to pick him up. In an unexpected move Friday morning, Lawson took the stand himself and said to this day he doesn't know why Brooks Haug wanted Rogers' car moved and knew nothing of a murder. However, witness testimony, interviews, and jail phone calls proved otherwise, revealing he knew Haug wanted Rogers gone. It only took the jury about 2 hours to reach a verdict. Before recommending a sentence, the jury heard from one of Crystal Rogers' daughter, 21-year-old Tori Rogers. Tori was just 11 years old when her mom disappeared. Through tears, she told the jury her mom will miss out on one of her biggest milestones in life, her wedding. She told them, quote, "It's not gotten easier, it's gotten harder every day." Barbara Coulter, Steve Lawson's mom, and his defense also pleaded with the jury to have mercy on Lawson. Coulter first apologized to Crystal Rogers' family, especially her mom, Sherry Ballard. She said she didn't raise her son to be involved in anything like this, but then she told the jury, quote, "What decision you make, you will have to live with that decision the rest of your life." Prosecutor Shane Young ultimately had the last words before the jury was to decide how long he'll spend in prison. Young pointed right at Lawson, looking him in the eyes, and said, quote, "You are not a man." Lawson sat there, not showing any emotion. Young went on to say, quote, "Don't take pity on him, don't take mercy on him, give him every freaking thing he deserves." After about 15 minutes, the jury came back and recommended a sentence of 17 years in prison. And 17 years from the jury is just a recommendation. The maximum would have been 25 years in prison. The judge has the final say in this, and formal sentencing will not happen until August 6th.
All right, so let's unpack this. You have covered the Crystal Rogers story. Literally, you were working the weekend that she disappeared, so You've been leading the charge from the very beginning. What is next from the Lawson camp? Any talk of appeal?
So actually in court today, before we wrapped up for the day, the defense team was talking about an appeal, but the judge, Judge Charles Sims, he was saying, hold on, we're not talking about an appeal until after the formal sentencing come August. But from the beginning, the defense team for Steve Lawson has been trying to delay this case twice before the trial started. Right. And then the day of trial on Tuesday, they tried to delay it again, saying they were hired on late. Ted Lavitt was the original attorney for Steve Lawson. He was fired, so they came on late. They had thousands of pages of evidence, hundreds of hours of interviews to go through, and they said on day one in court that they were not adequately prepared to represent their client. And then
there was the issue of the DNA, the hairs in the vehicle that hadn't been tested, right?
Right. They wanted those hairs tested prior to this case going to trial, but the judge determined that's not important here. We're going to move along, and the prosecution in court, they were saying that it doesn't matter whose hairs those were because Steve Lawson has already admitted to tampering with Crystal's car.
So for the past 10 years, Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, has been very outspoken, calling for justice for her daughter. She is silent now after this verdict that she's been waiting a decade to receive. Why?
Right. She's always wanted justice for Crystal in this case, and she was going to do everything in her power to make sure that has happened. So the prosecution team, they advised the family not to speak to media because they didn't want to jeopardize this case in any way. And so I think for the Ballard family, it's been hard to be quiet, but especially today, I think it might have been easy for them because they were just so emotional throughout this week, having to hear certain interviews and phone calls talking about Crystal and what may or may not have happened to her. So I think for them, physically and emotionally, they just probably couldn't bring themselves to speak about it.
And exactly what happened to Crystal Rogers, even though we have this conviction here, is still not clear.
Right, and that was the argument, the big argument from the defense here, saying we don't even know if a murder has been committed here, but we have to remember too that this is not a murder charge. This is a conspiracy to commit murder charge, and the prosecution kept saying that, you know, this has to be an agreement. An agreement was made, and the jury believed what the prosecution was saying, that there was some type of an agreement between Steve Lawson and Brooks Houck, and we heard in witness testimony that in some interviews and phone calls that Steve Lawson was saying Houck wanted Crystal gone. And then there was also that phone call that night, July 3rd into the 4th, where Steve Lawson called Brooks Houck and said, the job is done. So to the prosecution, that was the agreement, the conspiracy to commit murder agreement.
It's such a tangled web, and it's played out over so long. The next chapter is coming next month when Brooks Houck and Steve Lawson's son, Joseph Lawson, are set to go on trial. And will there be dots connected to other murder cases that are outstanding in Bardstown?
A lot of names thrown out there in this trial for Steve Lawson, other suspects and unindicted co-conspirators.
His brother and mom among them.
Yep.
All right, a tangled web. Fallon, thank you for leading the charge on this. We know that you've been working a long day, so go get some rest.
Absolutely.
We'll look for your story on WDRB.com.
Thank you, Gil.